Crafting. Probably amongst one of the oldest mechanics in video games as a whole. You can find crafting in all kinds of video games spanning any number of genres. Depending on how the game wants to facilitate crafting, it can serve any number of purposes, such as being tied to progression, or generally used to maintain stats, like a hunger mechanic or something. And it certainly stood the test of time throughout all kinds of games. But I do have one little gripe with crafting in the current day, and to me it's just not engaging enough. Now, before I move on to any topics, I do need to just mention real quick, I don't think crafting systems are fundamentally flawed or anything like that. I feel like in 99% of circumstances they serve the purpose just fine. Rather, I make this video because I want to pose the question of why not make something good even better. Because in the worst case scenario for crafting systems, they serve the purpose but they're not very interesting. And why not make them interesting, you know what I mean? And yeah, so with that little forewarning out of the way, I'd like to lay down some terminology and a scenario for you real quick. Let's go ahead and break down a typical crafting scenario. So let's say that you're playing a survival game and you want to make an iron sword. So you chop a tree and get some wood. Then you go mining and you get some iron. Hit the craft button and then you get an iron sword. And yeah, there you go, that's typical crafting. The reason I sort of made custom art for all of this is because crafting is so, I guess, just uniform throughout every game. Basically, you could pick 95% of games with crafting and most of the times it's going to look the same. For the purposes of this video, we're going to refer to this as linear crafting. And yeah, just about every game that you can find with a crafting system in it has linear crafting. And that's mostly because it just gets the job done. There's a reason linear crafting appears in so many games. It's simple, it's mostly elegant, and it's a pretty go-to way to add some depth into games. But what does the opposite of linear crafting look like? And why do I like it so much more? Let's go ahead and head back to Minecraft for a minute. Allow me to introduce you to Tinker's Construct, or the other name that I lovingly refer to it as, the blacksmithing mod. And do you know what every blacksmith needs? An anvil, obviously, but also a forge. Let's build one real quick. Nice. So yeah, Tinker's Construct might be my favorite mod of all time, and that's gonna be for a handful of reasons. For one, the smeltery works like a smeltery. You put raw metal in, and ingots come out. By default, it actually yields you 2 ingots, which is really cool. But the actual biggest reason why you would want Tinker's Construct is because the changes it makes to the crafting system, at least with regards to the tool crafting. So let's go ahead and make a pickaxe. Get some molten metal in your foundry. When it's all melted and ready to go ahead and right-click on the little spigot there, and let's go ahead and have it fill that pickaxe head cast. Wait for it to cool down, and hey, what do you know? We have an iron pickaxe head. But what do we do with it? This is sort of going to be the main thing that you do in Tinker's Construct. Basically, you'll have the ability to make certain tool parts out of materials that you find in the world. Combine all of the components together and you'll end up making a completely unique weapon with its own damage values and durability and even traits that it has access to, based largely off of what materials it's made of. This is obviously super cool because you have the ability to basically fine-tune whatever tool that you're making, whether it be a pickaxe or a sword or something, and you can end up having it do exactly what you want it to by basically just fiddling around with what metal goes with what tool part and how it looks whenever it's all assembled. From henceforth I dub thee Cool Pickaxe. And yeah, it even physically changes the look of the tool, depending on what metals are used and where they're placed. This can serve kind of a double purpose, right? Because obviously you have a usable tool, but alternatively you can simply make something that just looks really cool and have it hanging up in some, like, item frame or something, to serve as decoration. Couple that with the smeltery being a multi-block structure, and I think it actually lends itself to Minecraft's general aesthetic really well. Not just art style wise, but also in terms of game design. I haven't even mentioned how you can put extra modifiers on tools yet. You can craft modifiers to make things like making your tool faster, or giving it fire aspect, or giving it silk touch or something. Just all kinds of stuff. And individual modifiers once again change the look of the tool. Tinker's even gives you options for making different kinds of melee weapons too. And you can make bows if you wanna as well. I wanna make a cleaver real fast, let's do that. Add a little of this and a little of that, and I shall call this one Really Cool Sword. Yay, look at it go, it's so cool, look at it go. Yeah. And yeah, so this is all really neat, but what about stuff that isn't just tool crafting? Well, allow me to jump over to Terraria for a little bit. The Stars Above mod is a full conversion for Terraria. It's currently super underdeveloped right now, only stretching as far as some amount of pre-hard mode. And if you didn't understand any of that sentence, sorry, I can't help you. I'm not talking about Terraria in depth here necessarily. A cool part of Starlight River, though, is actually the weird and tiny neat little crafting system it has involving food. The prep station is a unique crafting bench that allows you to put one main dish, 2 side dishes, and 1 seasoning down to create a completely unique food buff. A fully customizable food buff that, when combined with other food buffs, allows you to really min-max on stats, especially in regards to a specific playstyle that you have, whatever class or whatever kind of weapon you want to use for that class, stuff like that. It's here where I want to mention that both the food crafting in Starlight River and the tool crafting in Tinker's Construct act as examples of nonlinear crafting. The individual components actually make up multiple parts of whatever you're trying to make, and you can more or less decide to slot them in whatever spot they're supposed to go to get different things out of them. It's more like a free-form crafting system that basically allows you to make decisions based on a player-to-player preference for how you want something to work. Nonlinear crafting systems are really cool to me because they kind of breathe a new life into materials whenever you see them. Instead of picking up iron and, knowing you can make a sword or a pickaxe or something, you look at iron now and all of a sudden it's, oh, I wonder how durable that is, or I wonder how hard it hits, or stuff like that. I have a personal bias for metals in video games just because I quite like blacksmithing. I have a high school metallurgy certificate that basically just tells other people that I'm really into heavy metals. I am the truest heavy metal fan. But yeah, like you can tell just at a glance whenever you see some sort of metal like lead or something, oh, it's really heavy, I wonder what that means for a tool. And that's not even considering the fictional metals that whatever the mod or the game incorporates, because that can do all kinds of stuff too. And it typically does. These freer form, non-linear crafting systems are all super cool, right? And there's a pretty big part of me that just wants to see these systems in, I guess, just fully original projects, because so far we've only been looking at mods for them, right? I know the reason why they're not necessarily in every survival game or whatever the case may be, and we'll talk about that reason for why that is in a little bit. But I know personally from what I've played, that there's at least one game that has a sort of similar system to this. Lies of P is a Souls-like game that has a lot going for it in terms of its genre, and I guess just outside of its genre too. It's a really good game. As you can tell from its presence in being in this video, it kinda sorta maybe roughly has a crafting-ish system that's similar to Tinker's Construct, kinda. I know that if I don't bring up this point correctly, it's gonna make me look like a complete idiot, but just stick with me on this one for a little bit, I promise. Weapon assembly is sort of a pivotal mechanic to Lies of P. Basically, the entire idea is taking a handle from one weapon and the blade of another weapon, slapping it together and making it work for you in terms of a build style. You have different heads for weapons that can do things like apply an elemental status or deal a different damage type, and then you also have handles which govern things like the moveset that they do and what their scaling looks like, whether or not they're good for strength builds or dex builds or stuff like that. And this, on the surface, without really knowing anything about it, seems like a vastly simpler system as compared to Tinker's Construct. But make no mistake, there is depth here too. Let me put it this way, in the worst case scenario, you at least get a really goofy combination that looks ridiculously funny. Yes, let me just stab with my hammer. Swingy knife, swingy knife, swingy knife, swingy knife. I could literally make a video talking about just Lies of P and how all of its systems work, the weapon assembly being one of them. But just know that there's a reason I highlighted this system in specific. It's because it just gets my brain activated and lets me really think about the different combinations of stuff that I can make. And that sort of lends credence to the importance of the weapons that you're using. Not unlike Tinker's Construct, just again simplified and made to fit the mechanics of this game as opposed to Minecraft. So yeah, this system is really cool, but the only other game I can think of that even has a crafting system similar to this is Dragon Age Inquisition. And it's a lot more typical with its crafting structure. You actually make weapons and stuff. Which, again, works, but why is it only 2 games that I can find with this crafting system? Well, I think I might have the answer, and honestly, it might be too in-depth. For a dev team to put in nonlinear crafting, there needs to be a lot of work put into it to even make it function in the first place. For one, all the combinations of parts you can put together acts as sort of the immediate barrier to entry. It's going to be really tedious to basically make art for all of the different combinations of stuff that you can put together. In the case of Tinker's Construct, you can look through the creative menu and basically see that only super uniform tools are being made here. They're all made from the same material, they're not mixed with any other materials, and they don't even have any modifiers on them or anything. Which isn't to say that they're not implemented, it's just, I don't know, this gives you sort of an idea of just how much art needs to be created for something like this. This is one of those sort of unique instances where 3D assets might be a better way to go about a mechanic like this as opposed to 2D art. Which doesn't always happen, but, you know, it's a factor sometimes. But obviously, if that's not an option for whatever the game is going for, making 2D or 3D art for whatever UI elements or, you know, whatever thing you're making, then that obviously puts a pretty big limit on it immediately. And that's just from the dev side. As a player, you might not necessarily want to jump into a whole in-depth crafting system where you need to apply your brain power to get the most out of a tool, or a food, or whatever the case may be. And that's totally fair. That's why these more simplistic, linear crafting systems work a lot better. They're just simpler and they still get the job done. That's not to say that I don't want nonlinear crafting to be a thing in more video games. But I will say that if nonlinear crafting just had a chokehold on games with crafting systems, we'd probably be pretty sick of it by the time the 5th game came out with a nonlinear crafting system in it. I'm not necessarily trying to use 100% of my brain to play a video game for hours on end. That doesn't sound fun to me. Doing it a little bit is fine, right? Having a couple games with this system could be a really good way to accent the game feel and, you know, just breathe some depth into the genre that you're making it for. Especially if your game has any sort of RPG mechanics, because it can tie into wider build crafting for your character and your playstyle. But yeah, turning the hand-eye crafting realisticness up to 11 isn't the only solution here. So how can we make linear crafting more interesting? Need that, thank you. Abiotic Factor is really good and I will be making a video on it very soon. But for now I want to use it as an example of really good linear crafting. This game may or may not be my favorite survival game that has ever come out. And without talking too much about Abiotic Factor itself, a lot of it has to do with basically just the tightness of design. Everything just fits really well here. The crafting in Abiotic is so unassuming that you might not really assume anything from it, other than that it's just a crafting system like most other games. The, for lack of a better term, genius in this crafting system doesn't lie with the recipes themselves, it's how the materials work. So basically from the word go, you'll start being able to craft stuff, right? You'll need some basic materials like metal scrap and wood to be able to make any of the stuff in this game. What's really cool though is that all of these materials never stop being important. So instead of it being a super annoying grind to grab all of the materials from the sources that you know, due in part of the setting of the game, the resource gathering angle is largely based off of actually scrapping physical parts of the environment. Some of these are items and some of these are furniture, and some things you just can't take with you and you just have to break. So what you'll end up seeing is more complicated machinery and parts and props, and that's what you end up breaking to get more of these materials. You can get wood from crates and chairs and all kinds of stuff, right? And that works for a little while. But if you need more wood for more of your crafting, you need to start finding some pallets in the storage sector or whatever. And me just explaining how this works doesn't necessarily do it justice. This really is a super intelligent way to handle it, because it basically means that every material that you come across is super important in some way. Because they never get devalued, they actually increase their value as the game goes on. And the game accounts for this by making it to where you can find more of these materials by furthering your progress in the game. And it's just cool because so many survival games don't necessarily do this. You don't come across a bigger, easier to mine tree, right? You come across the same tree that gives you the same wood or just a prettier wood. And that sort of loses value to a player over time because you already have your house built, you already have your tools made, and you don't really need wood as much anymore. So, okay, cool, Abiotic Factor is in a really unique spot that just makes the linear crafting work super well. And honestly, that's kind of it. That's all I really have to say for it. There's no catch here. You do get things like a lot more crafting recipes that require different materials that you don't have access to, but it's all the more reason to be excited because the game has conditioned you to go, okay, that's a new material. How many of these things can I make with this material? And yeah, like I said, it sounds super obvious, but maybe that just speaks to how well it works. Like I said before, Abiotic Factor is going to get its own video at some point, probably pretty soon. But let it be known that if you were sorta on the fence of this game and you've heard about it before, let me tell you right now that it is absolutely worth playing. It's in early access right now, but no part of this feels unfinished. It feels perfectly good to play. And there is a lot to look forward to as well. All the stuff that I've mentioned for Abiotic has only been in regards to crafting. I use it as the example of perfect linear crafting, and that's only with regards to the crafting. This game has a lot going on that just works perfectly for me. And if you're looking for a little bit of a change up in the survival game formula, then absolutely pick up Abiotic Factor. And if you're a dev looking for some sort of inspiration for your crafting system, then also check out Abiotic Factor. And yeah, I guess that's gonna be it for me. If you liked what I had here to say today, then go ahead and like and subscribe. And if you're feeling extra charitable, then I have a Patreon. But just watching the videos works too. Have a good day, everybody. Then absolutely pick up Then absolutely pick Then absolutely pick up